Welcome to the Neuroscience and Spirituality Symposium. If you could just tell us where you are in the chat so we know that you're there. Let us know that you can see us because we have no way of knowing. And Matt, if you see something in the chat, let me know so I know.
Great. It looks like people are entering into the chat from San Francisco. Everyone can see us.
Cool. So my name is Angelo John Lewis. I'm the director of the Sacred Inclusion Network, and I'm about to introduce my three esteemed panelists. From the top left, Ameshi. Oh my God, I messed her last name up the third time. Wait a minute, don't tell me. Moritz. And she's calling in from the other side of the world. And what I'll tell you is that she's an expert in something called neurobusiness. She also invented a particular course that combines her experience, the experience of working with this fellow who's big in trauma, whose name I'm forgetting. Help me out here, Ameshi.
Thomas Hubel.
Thomas Hubel, thank you. And she's a delightful person. And then going to the right is our real master of ceremonies, because I'm the fake master of ceremonies. The real boss is the inimitable Jim Hickman, who, among other things, is a co-founder of Ubiquity University. Back in the day, he was a big citizen diplomacy guy, for those of you of a certain age. He was one of two people in the United States that carried that banner, and he's worked in the United States. And I read his piece in the Ubiverse, and if you don't know what the Ubiverse is, somebody should send an explanation in the chat as to what it is. And it was called something about spies. And it's about Jim's experience of trying to be recruited by Russian spies. And I said, I got to talk to this dude. I managed to talk to him, and he says, I'll talk about spies, Angelo, for your podcast, but what I'm really into is neuroscience. And him and the people at Ubiquity University, their thing is to teach 21st century skills, of which neuroscience and spirituality is. I think that's the right tense. Last but not least, the esteemed Matthew Robertson. Matthew has been involved with two controversial movements, which I won't go into. I received a long message from somebody. Why are you inviting somebody from Shambhala? Oh my God. Which I have to send to Matt. But anyway, Matt's a very good guy. He's also involved with Ubiquity. And and he's going to give us a wonderful presentation, which I've had a chance to witness and see. What else I didn't say. And the other person who's not here, who's here virtually, is the esteemed Jordan Quaglia, who's an associate professor of contemplative psychology, and he's the research director for the advancement of contemplative education at Europa University. He's going to be chiming in, or he's not going to be chiming in. We're going to have a video of him. That's what I want to say. I have to tell you some logistics. First of all, in your upper right-hand corner, the first one is chat. I would prefer, if you have questions, don't use that one, but put it in the next one, which is questions. Okay? After that, the next one is poll. See, a poll is up there now, and some of you have already said, 66% of you say you know a little bit about neuroscience, and nobody says that they know nothing. Now, the poll is changing as we speak. And I'm going to put another poll up in a minute. I have to mention one other thing before I forget. Also, in the last slide, you don't have to take notes if you don't want to. There are handouts. All the handouts are the presentations that are going to be given to you. The other thing I want to mention is this is a precursor to a much more extensive Ubiquity University course. That's 4 sessions, which will include all these individuals that I mentioned, and it starts September 9th. So intermittently, I'm going to give you a special offer so you can register for that, but we'll go into that later. And before I introduce Jim, I'm going to put another poll up, if you don't mind. And this is about your meditation and spiritual practice. So you can just fill this out, and please fill it out. At the meantime, I'm about to introduce the esteemed my colleague, Jim Hickman. You're, there you are, Jim.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm looking right at my screen, but it looks like I'm looking somewhere else. I'm not real good with these.
Too many drugs in the 60s.
Well, that may be, yeah, maybe I am looking somewhere else.
Jim,
Okay,
shall I
so
call up your slides, or are you going to do it?
let me just see if I can do them, and if not, then
Meanwhile, 66.67% have a regular spiritual practice.
That's amazing.
13% I practice occasionally. 12% I have one, but it's not particularly formal. And 6.25% I don't have one. Cool.
yeah, mine aren't calling up, so you can
All
do
right.
it.
I will do it, Jim.
Yeah. So I was struck by Roussan's comment, and for the three of us to take into account, and maybe we'll talk a little about it in the question and answer, but as Roussan said, I'm excited about more happiness and resilience and how our stories help us to connect with each other beyond our differences and prejudices. So I'm gonna, think about some stories that might address that, Roussan. Thank you for making that comment.
And Jim, your slides are up. You can just direct me to do whatever you want.
Yeah, in the meantime, let me just give you an overview of what neuroscience is about and how we can use it in a way that, in a sense, develops more happiness and resilience, as Roussan says. There, in this first slide, you see there are three quotes that are important as we go through the presentation. Rick Hansen, who's one of the best neuroscience psychotherapists who takes it into practice in a significant way, is known for saying the brain takes its shape from what the mind rests upon. And that's a crucial principle here, that whatever goes through our mind affects the shape and function of our brain. And then, as Carla once said, neurons that fire together, wire together. We'll also look at what that means. But in the general sense of the brain, it's made up of these cells called neurons that represent, in a sense, all of what we're thinking, feeling, and about to act about. And they fire together in a consistent way that represents our dominant thinking, let's say, and I'll get into it a little bit further later. And then the other important principle for what we're all in the midst of is hypercomplexity, which I'll explain a little more in a minute. So let's go to the first slide there. I wanted to just highlight a couple of the contextual aspects of my perspective on things. One, which is a part of what we're all talking about here, evolution has equipped the human being with the capacity to participate in our own awakening and in the further evolution of life. It's a very specific and unique aspect of what evolution is built into our heart, brain, mind system in terms of living species on the planet. And then when I talk about mind, I talk about an all-encompassing awareness of our bodily existence and experience. And using mind in an intentional and attentional way, it can direct us toward our awakening. And then our capacity to participate in our own unfoldment begins with awareness of who we are. We start right with who we are. And then a sense of who we want to become. Let's go to the next slide. And that's a part of what, next slide.
Yes, I heard you, sorry.
Okay, and that's a part of what we, I think there's a slide before this.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
It's okay. because there's a slide in which we talk about hypercomplexity, because this is a really important concept for how we're living today. If we start in the far left-hand, left down corner where it says 1750, etc., we see how the various aspects of experience of the natural world, of our own participation in it, over the last 200 years has gone from separation, because forest loss was this very specific thing for people who focused on that. Now, all of these components are interdependent. And so you see at the top there, we're talking about a time when no individual human intelligence can actually figure out, because of the hypercomplexity of all of the interconnections that are going on in our natural and in our human world. No individual knowledge, perception can figure out how they're all going to work. And I was going to go to the next slide, a brief example of that from my own world. In the last 30 years of the 20th century, I spent most of my time working in U.S.-Soviet, U.S.-Russian relations. I traveled to the Soviet Union over 150 times during that period, and was involved with a wide variety of activities. And the guidance from the intelligence community and the political community in the US was always that it would be really good if we could take the Soviet Union apart and turn it into its individual component states. That would be good for the world. And so what I illustrate is that happened. And it has cost us about $12 billion in military, the lack of freedom because of our response to 9/11, et cetera. And as we know from Afghanistan and Iraq, the world is, in a sense, more violent, at war, than it was 30 years ago. And so this is just an example, small example from my own life, about how the experts look at what might happen as if that's what could happen, without understanding that it's so complex today. We have to take a much broader view than we ever have before to understand. Next slide, please. And so I want to just spend 1 minute on this perspective about looking into the future. Many of you may not remember Virginia Woolf, but she was a very popular writer, philosopher, and she wrote, shortly after World War I began, she wrote, "The future is dark," which on the whole is the best thing the future can be, because it means it's inscrutable. It's not terrible. It's just we don't know what it is. It's pregnant with possibilities, both light and dark. And it's up to each of us to find the light and make it shine. As Rebecca Solnit said, the future is dark with the darkness of the womb, meaning it has incredible opportunity for rebirth, or the grave. It has incredible opportunity for death. So it's a way to look at the future. In our neuroscience, we learn about how to restructure the way we think and feel about the external world. You can go to the next slide. In a way that gives us a perspective that's a little more toward the light than the dark. Quick word about neuroscience. Most of you probably know. It's traditionally defined as the scientific study of the nervous system. It's actually much more than that now, because we've learned that the brain, heart, and gut are all intimately intertwined in our decision-making, our feeling, our thinking processes, and that there are significant number of neurons in the heart, the neuron being the nerve cell within the brain that we design, and it is that we describe as is structured to carry our thoughts and feelings into other parts of our awareness, in a sense. And we now know that the heart has neurons. We even call it the heart brain sometimes. So we refer to all this as the heart brain mind system. Next slide, please. Which is what neuroscience is really about. And some of this comes out of the research at the HeartMath Institute Research Center, where they really have demonstrated through research and application how important the heart is and the function of the heart capacity in influencing mind and feelings as it creates a kind of internal world that affects dramatically the external world in a way that, in a sense, leads us toward living from the inside out. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about hypercomplexity, it's also important, going back to this, evolution gave us this capacity to perhaps participate in our own unfoldment. It's important to look at the brain. It's the most hypercomplex system that we have ever discovered in the entire universe. There are 80 to 100 billion neurons. Each neuron connects with about 5,000 other neurons. And that means that each connection of which creates a brain state. And that means that all the brain states that affect our mind equal 10 to the millionth power. And the number of atoms in the known universe is 10 to the 80th power. So you see, it's a much more complex, in a sense, system, living system, than all of what we've found out so far about the rest of the universe. Next slide. What we've learned, when I was, I don't know, junior or senior in high school, which was about 50 years ago, I was taught that the brain is set by the time I'm 15. It never changes after that. And then maybe 15 years later or so, the age moved to 25, that actually our brain continues to develop itself until we're about in our mid-20s. Well, in the last 20 years, we've found that all of that is completely untrue. And because we now know that the brain can change its shape, function, and capacity to affect mind, in a sense, until the day we die. However, we have to participate with that change. So I go back to, it's about how much attention and intention we provide from inside ourselves, from our mind, in a sense, to structuring our brain into a form that allows us to become the person we really want to be. And as Roussel has said, bring more happiness and resilience into our life. And in that sense, we say that one's experience matters, because everything you feel now in this moment leaves some residue behind in your brain. And it comes back to the lasting residue reflects the persistent pursuit of possibility. So the more we participate in the design of the neuronal communities in our brain, the more possibilities we have to become more resilient, happy, healthy, and other things that we all aspire to. Next slide, please. Mind changes the brain in significant ways that last. And one of the things that is important in that is that evolution has taught us to favor negative experience over positive experience. We call it negativity bias. So that a long time ago, 250,000 years ago, when we're out on the savannah hunting, it was much more important to remember the threats to our lives than just sit around the fire in the evening and have a good time. We always remembered the negativity because our lives, our survival of the species depended on that. Today, we don't need that so much, but it's still active within us. So, for example, your boss at work looks at your at the summary of your work and says, "Wow, it looks like you've done a really good job here." But you're late a lot of times. You got to really do something about coming in on time. And what happens for most of us is that we remember that criticism throughout the day more than the 6 or 7 things positive that he told us. And couples therapists have said that they can tell when a relationship, a marriage, a boyfriend-girlfriend, boyfriend-boyfriend relationship will last within 1 or 2 meetings based on the number of positive comments each of the partners say to one another. And they judge that it takes about 5 to 7 positive statements to overcome 1 negative statement in a relationship. So we should just remember that. When we criticize someone for good reason, it's also important to either precede that or follow that with a number of nice statements, positive things to say. Let's go to the next slide. 2 practices that'll help us with this. One that we call taking in the good. And that is about when you have a good experience, and this is a strange, way of looking at it, because it's strange to me now and then, because the practice is when you have a good experience, stop for 20 or 30 seconds and just let it flow through your whole body. Feel it intensely. And over time, it becomes wired into your brain. And those positive emotions are then crucial to changing your brain in a way that positivity is prioritized over negativity. And then the second exercise is the daily gratitude acknowledgement. We probably all read so much these days about how important gratitude is. And it can't be overemphasized. One of the writers who's done a very good analysis of the 31 positive effects happiness has on us says that if gratitude were a drug, it would be the most popular drug in the world because of all of what it does for us. So there's some value, significant value in daily spending a little time either in writing or just inside yourself in being thankful for the various things for which you can be grateful in your life. I mean, in my life, for example, simple things. The driving patterns here in Bolivia are very different from what I was trained in the United States. People, rarely let someone into a line. People don't stop at red lights. They just look around and run through. It's a different way of being with your car and traffic. So I take my son to school every morning, and when I come home, I stop once I park my car, and I just do about a minute of gratitude for having made one more safe journey into the Bolivian traffic world and back into my home. So simple things like that, which we can do throughout the day. A few minute or so of gratitude for what a great meal you made today, honey, etc. Gratitude acknowledgement is really important to creating a better, more resilient, happy life. So then the other thing that is important is to understand how impactful words are, because words actually shape your reality. And it's important that we pay attention to the words we use. Angry words, for example, have a huge impact on children, and it can affect them for a long time. And so attention, again, is one of our practices. Be aware of who we are right now, what we're doing, what we're saying to others, and then use that attention. Matt will get into it further in his talk about mindfulness, but this is one of the things mindfulness really develops for us, the capacity to utilize our attention in a sense like a spotlight on who we are in this moment. And then we have a moment of choice. Is this who we really want to become and be? Let's go to the next slide. the other aspect of who we are and how we act in the world that's so important to bringing more resilience and happiness into our lives are understanding our habits, which are mostly driven by our unconscious self. Most habits come out of unconscious conditioning when we were very young. And as we say, if you follow the same habits today that you did yesterday, then tomorrow will be the same as today. So we have a choice today to begin to move into a different way of using our habitual behavior in support of who we want to become. And that then affects our identity. So for example, I worked for 30 years in the Soviet Union. I don't speak Russian. I've lived in Bolivia for 15 years. I don't speak Spanish. And for a long time, I had as a part of my identity kind of, I would say to people, I bet you've never met anyone before who spent 30 years in a foreign country and don't speak that language. It was sort of a note of pride within me that I have recognized is not really who I want to be. And so recently, I've shifted this. My 15-year-old son has wanted to learn about neuroscience. So we made a deal. Once a day, I spend about 15 to 30 minutes with him on certain principles about neuroscience. And then the next day, he spends about 15 to 30 minutes with me teaching me Spanish. So I'm getting rid of that part of my identity that says, like so many US people of my generation, we don't need to learn a foreign language. The whole world should speak English. Because I don't want that to be a part of who I am. And it is not any longer because I'm learning to speak Spanish. And the important part of that for me is that it's bringing into my relationship with my son aspects of being together that we never had before. And I can talk more about what I learned from him yesterday when we started talking about hypercomplexity and climate change and his generation's attitude toward the reality that the world he's going to inhabit is going to be so significantly different than what we look at today. It's almost scary, as we know from the testimony of an awful lot of young people. Let's go to the next slide. So I'll end here with some practices that we can follow up on if you access this slideshow, taking in the good, which I described, and then something I call back pocket positivity, in which you remember a couple of the most incredible experiences you've ever had, how positive you felt. And as you bring them back into your memory, you immerse them into your mind, body, heart, in a sense, to such a degree that they completely occupy you once again, the feeling, the excitement, etc. And then you put it in your back pocket so that when you're, well, I used to say standing in the line at the bank, but I guess people don't stand in the line at the bank anymore. But when you're shopping, and I do know that now people go to the store and someone argues about wearing a mask. And so you're watching something like this go on and feelings arise of anger and frustration, etc. You stop for a moment and you pull out of your back pocket one of those incredible experiences and you bring it back into who you are in that moment. And it changes, one, your brain, and it changes the outside world in a way that the perspective is very different. Then the daily gratitude, we talked about that, doing a little bit of that every day. Random acts of kindness, kindness, simple things are often overlooked in their impact. Kindness generates kindness. And there's a practice that we call random acts of kindness. I'm going too long, but this is my last slide. And so that, just walking along and you see someone who needs help and you help them out. That's all. So do this on a regular basis, and it spreads kindness throughout the world. And then smiling is often overlooked, and with masks, it's hard for people to see how much we smile at one another, but smiling is contagious. And it brings more positive feelings into the world around you than we'll ever know. So smiling is a practice that is important to pursue. Next slide, Angelo. So I wanted to just show you once again what Angelo started with. This is the follow-up to this webinar. A course we'll be giving, the three of us, plus Jordan, who can't be with us in person today, but will be with us on video. The four of us will produce this course in September through Ubiquity, in which we will go into much greater detail about all the things we talked about today. Next slide, Angelo. And then I always provide a variety of references for people to read more about the things I've talked about. So I think that's good for now. Thank you very much. And Emeche and Matt, thank you for being patient with my taking some of your time. Bye.
Thank you, Jim. That was a wonderful introduction, and I could listen to you personally for another 15 or 20 minutes easily, even though I'm probably the most impatient of all of us. But in any event, it was great. So I want to just say a couple of things. We've deliberately not, we're not going to have like live questions from folks in terms of like talking into a microphone, but I want to encourage you to put any questions that come up not in the chat, but in the question part. And at the conclusion of this, these four presentations, we're going to have at least 20 minutes, hopefully, for Q&A, and we'll answer all your questions. And if any of the questions don't answer, we will respond to you. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I'll mention at the end, is that the Sacred Inclusion Network is opening its community sites. Open now. You'll see a slide from it, and this will be Neuroscience Month. And Jim will make some occasional appearances, and you'll hear about that later. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the esteemed Matthew Robertson, and we'll move on. Hello, Matthew. Whoops. Yes.
Fantastic. I'm wondering, Angelo, if you might actually be able to share the slides on my behalf.
I don't mind. I don't mind. Give me 1 second, Matt.
Great. Thank you so much. I could still see Jim when he was presenting, and I do like that format if possible. And I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who's here. Looks like we almost have 40 people, and it is just astounding that over 70% of us have a regular spiritual practice. I think that's totally awesome. I was lucky to have embraced a spiritual disposition in my life, having been born into a family that practiced in the Eureka School, which was founded by Oscar Ichazo back in the 1960s. If you've heard of the Enneagram, of course, the symbol has ancient origins, but the modern psychological work in theory was developed by Oscar. And finished my work in religious experience and mysticism at Europa University. So attended my first meditation retreat at age 13, have spent up to a month in silent meditation retreat, and this is a topic I'm deeply passionate about and am so excited to be here sharing with you today. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll jump in with something that Jim said in his presentation, which was about knowing who we are so that we know who we want to be. And I'd like to bring in this question of who we've been in the past. The questions of spirituality and understanding the human experience are so core to humanity and civilization itself that spirituality and different kinds of meditation, mindfulness, spiritual practices can shed a lot of light on what modern neuroscience is just helping us understand through science today. And I come from more of the spiritual side of the spectrum and use neuroscience to help deepen my daily practices. I know there's a lot of people who are discovering spirituality through understanding what neuroscience has to say about the human experience, but I think either way, it's undeniable that each area deepens the other in terms of our understanding of what is going on in our brains and our everyday experiences. So in this presentation, I'll speak a little bit about what's happening in the brain when we're practicing mindfulness. And I wanted to start off by sharing one of my favorite Zen proverbs, or koans, as they call it in many traditions, that goes like this. One should meditate for 20 minutes every day, and if you don't have time, you should meditate for an hour. And I do love that one because it speaks to the subjective nature of the control that we have over our direct experience. Apologies if the formatting is a little messed up here, but I wanted to start by introducing just the basics of mindfulness. There are many different traditions. There's many different practices, but in most of them, there is a standard equation of the kind of practice that we're engaging in when we sit down on the cushion, the chair, or engage in whatever our mindfulness practice is. And it really relates around this three-point practice: focus, notice, and redirect. And the first, with focus, has to do with aligning our focus or attention of the mind onto one object that we bring our focus to, that we try to stay with during the duration of our mindfulness practice. And then, of course, in between focusing on this object of attention, which can be internal or external, depending on the tradition and practice, we notice that something begins to happen. We begin to have thoughts. We begin to have feelings. We begin to have sensations in our body. Perhaps we're experiencing pain. Perhaps we're upset about something that happened to us earlier on in the day, and our mind begins to wander. So the second pillar of mindfulness is noticing when the mind or body wanders. And of course, the third point being that when we do have that moment of mindfulness and notice that we are no longer on our target object of attention, we willfully, intentionally, supportively guide our focus back to the object of attention. So those are the three basic tenets of many different mindfulness practices. And we'll go into the brain structure and function of what is happening during that three-step process. But before we do, I wanted to introduce two common brain myths that are pretty common actually in the neuroscience field that I've heard a number of times throughout my life. The first of which is that we only use 10% of our brains. And that's kind of a fun one, right? It's like, oh, we only use 10%. I have so much potential. You know, there's so much more left for me to tap into. And while that may be true, it is actually false that we only use 10% of our brains. We do use almost all of our brains almost all the time. And one of the reasons why this is the case is because of the second brain myth, the myth that there are specific areas of the brain that control specific activities and experiences. And on one level, while that is true, it's actually more accurate to think about the brain as a series of coordinating networks. It's like doing a cartwheel. You don't just use your hands, you don't just use your legs. Your whole body is working together to complete an activity or an experience. And the brain can be thought about in the same way. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about the first area of mindfulness, focus. What's happening when we bring our focus and attention to our object of attention? Well, what we're doing is we're engaging the central executive network of the brain, which is located in the frontal lobes. It's also known in the frontal parietal network. You can reference here the picture on the right to see which part of the brain is being activated here. And for those of us that do have a meditation or mindfulness practice, I invite you to go through these next couple slides experientially. When you first sit down and focus your mind, where do you feel yourself? Where do you feel your attention? And for me, I notice that when I first sit down and begin to corral the attention of my mind, that I notice most of this sense of self being here in the frontal lobes and the frontal parietal network. This is the region of the brain that's responsible for managing attention, as well as building focus over time. It's not in the slide, but it also has a lot to do with prioritizing different things, tasks, organization. And this is a region of the brain that develops through the 20s, peaks in the early 30s, and if there is no effort to regenerate it, does have a slow decline in terms of its structure and functioning after that point. And I put in some nice quotes here, just that I liked about these different regions of the brain. I took a course recently called the Inner MBA program by LinkedIn, Sounds True, and New York University, and was listening to one of their neuroscientists from Miami University speak about neuroscience and leadership. And her quote really struck me. Attention is the currency of leadership. Attention, focus, the attention you give your tasks, other people when they're needing to be heard, and yourself as you're navigating difficult conversations, really is the currency of how we operate and become successful in our lives. I do notice that my screen just changed.
Oh, sorry, Matt. My bad.
No worries. And we can move on to the next slide after the Simple Executive Network when we're ready.
Here we are.
Great, thank you. And so before we notice, there is a region of the brain that becomes activated during the mind wandering, right? We have our focus of attention on a target object, our mind wanders. What's going on here? Well, we're activating what's called the default mode network in our brain, which is located in the medial frontal lobes, and specifically the posterior cingulate cortex. And you'll see the picture here on the right. It's closer to the middle of the brain, and it's the region of the brain that is most often associated with the retrieval of memory, as well as self-related thinking. And as a mindfulness practitioner, this one should be very intuitive. You're sitting on the cushion in your chair, and something comes up about something that someone said earlier that day that bugged you, or something that you wish you said to someone in response, or anything that you've got going on, a source of stress and anxiety in your life, something that's self-related, and usually either in the past or the future. And I included this quote here because working with those thoughts, when our mind wanders, and not only thoughts, by the way, I should mention sensations and feelings, right? Emotions, but also, biofeedback from the body itself. This is really the fuel and the stuff that we work with in meditation. And there's a great quote by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. In the garden of gentle sanity, may you be bombarded by coconuts of wakefulness. And I think that this has to do with a shifted perception where we begin to see our thoughts, feelings, and sensations as meditators, not as the enemy, right? But as little jewels, as little gifts, as little opportunities to use them to fuel our practice. So this is what's happening when the mind is wandering. We're in the default mode network. We're not in the moment, and it's in our posterior cingulate cortex that is the foci of that internal experience. So we can move on to the next slide and talk about what happens when we actually notice that our mind has been wandering, that our attention has been elsewhere. And this function is located in the insula. You can see in the picture here, it's located more towards the brainstem, inside, closer to the center of the brain. And this region is responsible for noticing sudden or unusual things in the environment. Not only externally, but I should mention internally as well. You get a cut or a scrape, it gets too cold in the external environment, there's a bell that goes off, you hear a car crash, whatever it is, it's this alert system that allows us to actually become aware of when our mind is not in the present moment. And we can begin to see how this is actually a coordinated network. These things are not separate. When your central executive network knows that you're supposed to be focusing on your object of attention and your mind is wandering, it's the insula that alerts yourself to say, hey, I'm not doing the right thing. So you can see the ebb and flow between the insula and the frontal lobes that are working together to help you achieve whatever given goal it is that you might be going for. So we notice with the insula, the quote that I've picked for this slide, the gap between thoughts is where essence breaks through. As meditators, we notice our mind is wandering. We notice that is our moment of mindfulness. And for a split second, we have that sense of awareness that comes through when that thought has ceased. And it gives us the tiniest little glimpse of the ground of presence and awareness that is underneath our thoughts in each and every moment. So why does this matter, right? We just learned about what's happening in the brain when we're meditating, but what is the effect over time? Well, we do know that in practitioners who have a prolonged period of mindfulness practice, there are measurable changes to the structure and function of the brain itself. Brain networks in non-practitioners decline usually after the age of 50. However, if there is a regular mindfulness practice after the age of 50, we actually notice that the brain regenerates itself. And this is what the field has come to know as neuroplasticity, or the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life, regardless of age. And the two signatures that you notice, the two changes in the structure of the brain in longtime mindfulness practitioners are, one, the cortical thickening across all brain networks. So everyone is familiar with the image of a brain, right? You see it's the kind of the gray matter. This cortical substance actually begins to grow thicker. And there's also an increase in the brain gyrification across all regions, which is the little peaks and valleys of the brain. It's like when you crumple up the piece of paper, it has lots of crumples and area and mass. That's called the brain gyrification. And that actually also increases measurably in mass and surface area over time. Now, what that has to do with the function is that all of those brain networks associated with those different areas function more efficiently across all of those different networks. Those different networks that are responsible for different things are being trained, right? To know I've lost my attention, I bring myself back to the moment. And it becomes like aerobics or muscle memory or going to the gym. You can train these neural networks so that you can come back to presence, ironically enough, without having to think about it too hard. It becomes a muscle memory and response when practiced over time. And this, of course, affects pretty much everything: focus over time, general health, happiness, and well-being. So one powerful practice that you can take with you into your everyday life has been probably the singular most transformative practice in my life, is just the act of taking 3 deep breaths, knowing what's going on in my brain. Very easy to do no matter where you are or what you're doing, to take that moment to reset your attention back to the present moment. You keep your eyes closed, you take a deep breath, you understand the process of focus, notice, and redirect. You breathe, and here's the kicker. It's not just 3 deep breaths. You actually want to breathe into your belly. The Dantian has been a teaching across many different martial arts traditions and beyond, where it's said not only the body's center of equilibrium exists, but also the center of vital energy. And as you're taking these breaths, focus on the conscious relaxation, right? You can try it right now while we're on the call. Focus into the Dantian, 3 finger widths below the belly button. Consciously relax as you take 3 deep breaths. And either do it for 1 cycle of 3, or do it until you can focus on 3 deep breaths uninterrupted without any thoughts interrupting your experience. Do it first thing in the morning, entering a meeting, waiting in lines when you're anxious or stressed, passing through doorways, before eating meals, before public speaking, before and after exercise are all awesome opportunities and times to practice mindfulness. So we'll dive more into that in the class that we're teaching in September. And I wanted to leave you with that final quote. The bad news is you're falling through the air 100 miles an hour without a parachute. The good news, there is no ground. So this practice is constantly surrendering, right, to that energy in the body, to the present moment awareness that is at the ground of our experience all the time, and letting the mind sink down and absorb the natural energy and intelligence that exists at the foundation of our experience. So I also went a little bit over. Thank you so much for being here for this presentation. I look forward to diving into this further in September. And I hope that we left you with something that has an effect in your day-to-day life. Thanks, Jim. Angelo.
Thank you, Matthew. I know that some people probably need to leave, so I know that we're running a little bit behind, but I wanted to just give you a special offer that you can, if you want to take the course in September, you can follow the, I spelled audited wrong, but in any event, you can register for the class there by clicking the button. And if you use the discount code there, applied NSC 310, you get a 10% discount for the course. If you're going to stick around, I'll put this up later. But I just want to move on because we have a couple other things we want to do. Also, again, I want to remind you, if you have questions, please put them in the question part. You can see on your right-hand side of your screen, right next to the chat, there's a red little thing, which means somebody's put a question in there. That way we'll have all the questions in one place, and we're going to do it. And finally, I'm seeing somebody's screen there that's doing something on their computer. And sometimes I was seeing their email, so I don't know who that is, but if you could minimize it or something, it's kind of distracting. So we're going to try something a little bit. We don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to try, and I'm going to tell you about this before we do it. We have a video. It's 8 minutes long from Jordan Quaglia that we're going to play. And when we tried it yesterday, at one point the audio crapped out, right? So that might happen. If that happens, please refresh your screen and come back. Or if you go to the handouts, which is like right next to it's like upper right of your screen. Actually, the very upper right, there's a transcript there that's in PDF and Word form that you can follow along. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Jordan, and we'll see what he has to say.
I do psychology research, neuroscientific research on compassion and mindfulness and other topics. And so given this background as a scientist and researcher, I wanted to share with you mostly from a scientific lens today. So to be a bit different than just diving right into practice, but Charlotta in a bit will lead us in a compassion practice as well. And so what I want to talk about is from a scientific perspective, why and how compassion practice and loving kindness practice more specifically is an ideal starting point for helping us rise to meet these challenging times we're all in. For as Jim said, for these practices, I think, are really helpful for cultivating and nourishing this kind of heart coherence moment by moment in these times. So firstly, I think it's important to name again that these are unusual times we're living in. And one of the clearest aspects for me of these unusual times is that most of the time it seems that our society is sort of sweeping suffering under the rug. But increasingly during these times, I'm noticing that suffering is just more and more out in the open. It's a feature of our experience anytime that we tune in, not just to the news, but even to social interactions with loved ones, friends, strangers, when we go to the grocery store and have a very different kind of experience than we'd had in the past. And with that suffering more out in the open, we are naturally moved. Our heart is touched, and our empathic response is more activated. You could even say that during these times, for many of us, our empathy is sort of chronically activated. It's sort of a constant feature. Empathy for suffering is sort of a constant feature of our experience. And with that empathy for suffering, for so many of us who are already moved to be of help and of service in the world, comes this desire to do something to alleviate the suffering that we're seeing. But I think, as many of us find, it's not always so simple as just feel this empathy and then move to do something to help. Unfortunately, we find questions quickly arise in our experience, such as, what's the best way to help? How can I sort of maximize my efforts in order to maximize the benefit that I'm creating for others? Or even questions about, can I help in this way without causing harm in other ways? So it's not always such a straightforward narrative for us in terms of how to get involved, how to help in these times. And there's lots of disagreement about what's maybe the most helpful action. So it gets messy and confusing. And as a scientist who studies empathy and compassion, these responses are not that surprising, unfortunately. Research shows that exposure to suffering, whether it's our own or others' suffering, but especially the suffering of others, as well as questions about how to help that arise in that place, can be personally overwhelming and lead to a kind of decision fatigue, and we can call it sort of choice paralysis. And so when we meet a certain threshold of empathy, where the suffering is just so vast, we're encountering more suffering in these times maybe than we have in the past. This can lead to even something that researchers call compassion collapse, where we sort of hit this threshold at which we're not able to hold this pain any longer, and we sort of numb out. So if you're experiencing things like in these times, it can be a really confusing kind of experience to have this, have your heart moved, have this desire to help, and then also to come up against within yourself exhaustion, numbness, and so on. And in fact, research shows that when we experience just this empathic response alone, this can lead over time to a state of empathic distress, where we're personally overwhelmed by the suffering so much that we're unable to actually act in ways that will help to alleviate it. And that more chronically over time, if we stay in this more activated space of empathy alone, we can kind of get stuck. And this can lead to burnout and less likelihood of engaging in the world to take action. So there's been some neuroscientific research on this as well. And one of the interesting findings is that when we're in a state of empathy alone, when we're just empathizing with the suffering of others, the brain gets activated in ways that are associated with pain and with negative emotionality. So maybe that's not so surprising if you've experienced this kind of thing before. But then we can get kind of stuck in this place and not feel like we can regulate ourselves. So that's what leads to that kind of personal overwhelm. We feel the pain, we feel the negative emotionality, and then there's sort of an uncertainty about what to do. And in that space of uncertainty, that leads to emotion dysregulation, or you could say heart incoherence as a result of that. So against this backdrop, I want to share that compassion practices offer a kind of antidote, really a clear starting point for doing something helpful in these times. We may not think of our inner practices as action, but I want to frame it that way. And I want to say that compassion practice is maybe the most helpful starting point that we can take in these times, for the very reasons I was just saying that empathy affects us. Because when we're faced with so much empathy, that can lead to sort of misguided attempts, the research shows, misguided attempts to try and control and suppress that empathy response. And these are often very highly effortful strategies that involve kind of constricting our experience in ways similar to how Carla was talking about that constricted embodied state. And so when we're in this more constricted state, compared to that, compassion is a more expansive state. And our brain on compassion looks remarkably different than empathy alone. It leads to activation in areas associated with social connection, with reward, as well as with positive emotion. So in contrast to empathy alone, in contrast to that constricted state, these practices help us feel good in the moment when we do them. They support not just our short-term well-being, but our long-term well-being. And they make it more likely that we'll actually engage, take action in ways that help others too. So you could say that through compassion, we transform empathy. We work with empathy instead of against it. And we feel more personally resourceful and capable of taking healthy and helpful action. So compassion intrinsically is a kind of bold statement in these times, I think. A bold statement of a both and, that we need not sacrifice our own well-being for the benefit of others, nor do we need to harm others for our own gain. In fact, in these times of suffering, what is good for us through compassion can be good for others too, and vice versa. We can care for ourselves and others simultaneously. And indeed, my research on compassion shows that it's often experienced in this kind of simultaneous way. Whether we start with self-compassion, that more naturally leads to an outgrowth of compassion to others, or we can start with compassion for others and in turn experience compassion for ourselves simultaneously. So the basic idea, and Charlotta in a moment will be leading us in a kind of practice to experience this ourselves, but the basic idea is that there's something we can do to work with our empathy in more proactive ways that work with our empathic response instead of trying to dampen it or numb out or not experience this empathy for others and what they're going through. We can work with that response in ways that are genuinely helpful. And what's more, the great thing about compassion practice is we can do it anywhere, anytime. If we're looking for something that's genuinely helpful, we can start right here, right now with compassion practice. So we don't have to engage in this kind of process of what's helpful, what's not. Here's something, a clear starting point that is genuinely helpful, backed by scientific research, and it's something that's a both and. It helps us and it helps others simultaneously.
I'm going to introduce you to my esteemed colleague, Amiche Morris. Hopefully I'm saying it right. I've been practicing and practicing, and I keep getting it wrong, but I'm doing my best. And if Amiche, you'd like me to show your slides, I'll bring them up, and we can get rolling here. Give me a second.
Yeah. In the meantime, I really want to welcome everyone. At present, we are 35, and we are from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. Thank you, Angelo. And as you see, since my real passion, profession, work, mission is human behavior, and especially how to lead effectively and also in a way that it will bring joy and also for the good of all. I changed this, I chose this title, which is From the Illusion of Scarcity to the Realization of Abundance. And it might be a little strange for all of you, but just bear with me. I try to squeeze it into 10 minutes. Oh, yes, I'm timing myself, yes. So let's see.
Take your time, Amiche. You have lots of time. Take your time.
Yeah, but maybe the questions are also important. I'm really very interested about, everyone's comments, remarks, whatever. So can we just change to the next slide? Yes, the magic word enough. Do we need a magic word at all? And I think, yes, we certainly do. And she was talking a lot about hypercomplexity, which in a sense comes with the fact that we are bombarded by tons of data and tons of information day by day, which means that the capacity of our brain to digest it is just haven't reached there, which means that there are a lot of residue in our brain, and our brain is operating on an increased level of agitation, which means that we can get grumpy very easily, or tired, or just pissed off, or triggered, or whatever. So this means, and this is the reason why I decided, okay, now what we really need is a kind of mental detox. So we need to learn how to simply get rid of the residue day by day, day by day, day by day. Not more than 5-10 minutes per day. It is just enough. It is just enough. Otherwise, we will just, when you don't have your stomach to digest, then when you eat, then you will be just simply, dead. Okay, and how does it affect our environment? We are exploiting our natural environment. Species go extinct day by day. There are natural catastrophes, climate crisis, and we are exploiting ourselves too. And now I will be reading 2 statements, and I really want you to tune in, not just take in mentally, but really tune in into these 2 statements. And I really want you to somehow put in the chat, how do you feel when you really, when you let all the information reaches you? Okay? So the world richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth than almost 7 billion people in the earth. Okay? So how is it for you? Almost half of humanity is living on less than around $5 per day. Yeah, this is our reality. This is where we are now. Is it sustainable? And the saddest thing is that no one is happy. More and more people are suffering from diseases and addictions, including rich people too. So why are we really doing this? Are we really happy? And who is happy? And what is our life for? These are the big questions for this, I think, learning this enough or enoughness in our brain, in our behavior, in our choices, could be a kind of remedy. Can we change to the next slide? Okay. I'm teaching in Hungarian business schools too. And I really like this gentleman who is unfortunately not alive anymore, but he originally was from India, where spirituality really comes from, the center. And he was convinced that business is a force for good. And now I have a huge question mark, taking into consideration all the data that I was reading through in the previous slides. And what I especially like about this gentleman, because he was putting our focus on the environment instead of the people, if we want a radical change. So he said that if you really want to have a radical change, then put the focus on the environment that we create instead of the people, and just push them through on a forced change. Okay, can we change, Angelo? Yeah, and how can we do this? How can we be absolutely aware of the environment that we create as managers? Now I would like to invite Stephen Porges. You might be familiar with him, the Poliwager Theory, and I would like you to remember what Jim said, that our heart, gut, brain, everything is interconnected. And yes, we are taking in information from everywhere, and we are spreading out information from all of the parts of our bodies and the organs. And in the Poliwager theory, it is clearly stated that it is the vagal system that drives our body when we are entering into new situations. And the only thing that is needed in order to cultivate these new situations or really jump out of the airplane without the parachute if we feel totally safe. Okay, so if new leaders want to create, now can we just go back? If new leaders want to be successful, then the only skill they need to acquire is co-regulation. So how can anyone become a successful co-regulator in order to be able to really speak to the amygdala first? That is our stress center, fight or flight center, that really increases practically when we are feeling unsafe an environment. And since we are operating by definition with a higher state of agitation, then our size of the amygdala is really bigger. So if you want to co-regulate your environment, then first of all, you need to know about this theory. And then the second thing is that you need to work on yourself, because you need to self-regulate yourself the first. And then when you are grounded, when you have been taking any breath or as much breath as you can in order to feel yourself safe and grounded and connected to yourself and also the people around, then you will be able to go to the next step and building community coherence through co-regulation, right? If there is no regulation, no feeling of safety in the team, then the team will not be able to manage complex situations. And there is no individual, as Jim said, who is able to deal with this hyper complexity that is around us today. Okay, now there is a poll included, but
And I put your poll is up.
Your poll is up.
It says, how safe do you feel? It's a safety. How safe do others feel in your presence? There's two different questions. So the first is, how do you feel in general?
Exactly.
And how safe do others feel in your presence?
Okay, so you can find the poll in the chat. Your sense of safety in general. Okay, so when you enter a new situation or in your country, in your city, in your working environment, living environment, how safe do you feel? Are you totally safe? Can you express yourself freely? Will you be, welcome with any kind of suggestion? Okay.
So right now, Misha, it's 88.89% say they generally feel safe, and 10% says I sometimes feel safe.
Sometimes, and that's great. That's really, really great. Okay, then can we move on?
We have your other poll there too. Is how safe do you think about others in your presence?
Exactly. So, what is the environment that you can create? And are you aware at all the level of safety that you create?
And so far, it's about 50-50. Most of the time, people feel safe around me, and a little bit less, 45%, others always feel safe around me. About 50-50.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm really very happy. I'm really, really very happy. Most of the time, these numbers are really lower, much lower.
One person says that people generally don't feel safe around me.
One?
Just one.
Just one? Yeah, my guy. Okay, can we move on?
Sure.
Can we move on? So how can we do it? How can we really do it? Because it is really not easy, especially, even me. I've been in this profession almost 20 years now, and I am working a lot on myself. I am a regular practitioner, and I've been doing shadow integration 3-4 years now, especially Thomas Hubo, whom Angelo mentioned, and still from time to time I'm just finding myself, oh no, I just can't believe that it is really me. It is really me. Is reacting, or is this someone else is running the show, but definitely not me. Definitely not me. And let me introduce you the groundbreaking and really this kind of novum from Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, the neuroanatomist, and her book with the title Living a Whole Brain Life was published in May. So this is really brand new. And I don't know if you are aware of her. Do you know where she comes from? She is a neuroanatomist that I mentioned, and in 1996 she had a stroke, but a very severe one. He had a huge hemorrhage in her left brain, which meant that he totally lost all the access of the capacities that the left brain has. But in this very moment when that happened, he immediately got an access to the right brain, and she was immediately connected to something greater than she was. And she just felt joy. She felt connected. It was a kind of universal, transcendental experience that she went through. And out of this experience, she wrote a book, My Stroke of Insight, and she had a very successful TED Talk that I think by this time almost 30 million views was in this video. And she finished her talk with this sentence, that we have the power to choose from moment to moment the person who we want to be. Can you remember what Jim said? That when we are doing a regular practice, then we can really get to this state. And yes, we can get into this state because it is in our brain. It is really in our brain. Everything is in our brain, and sometimes we just do not have the right access to it. And okay, and immediately she was bombarded. Can we just go back? Can we just go back? Thank you. Okay, how to do it? So she had another 8 years for this research that was just published recently, and she found out another myth. So I'm addressing it to Matthew too, that we have a kind of emotional system center in our left brain, which was up till now, it was said to be the rational part of our brain, but there is also a kind of thinking system in our right brain. So there are two amygdalas, two hippocampi, and we can just really switch from the different parts. And these 4 parts, it consists of 4 parts altogether in the left brain that is focusing on the past or future, planning, projecting, scheduling, being functional, blah, 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 blah. And the right brain is in the present. The right brain, the right part of our brain is connected to the present moment. And I'm just going through very briefly on the different 4 parts, because she describes it as 4 different characters, which means that by definition, of our birth, we have 4 characters inside, anatomically, which isn't it great? Isn't it great that we can be anything, basically, if we want, only if we meditate and we create the access to get into these 4 characters. Okay, so first character, left brain thinking, get things done. Most of us, I think we are spending most of our time in first character, right? Because we want to be effective, we are valued by this, and most of the time this is where we feel comfortable. Okay, second character, left brain feeling. This is our life protector. It contains all the past memories, and the most important aim of this character was to save our lives, especially when we were children, when we were abandoned, and we weren't really taken care of. And this is why we built up some self-saving mechanisms. It is called the shadow, but most spiritual traditions call it the ego. And some of them wants to kill the ego, which is after this model and after this discovery, I think can we just simply stop killing our ego? Because it is just really in our brain. They are just brain tissues, so there is no way to fight against it. We can spend weeks, days in the bliss, in the right brain, but it will never go away. Okay, so after some time, we will get there again. Okay, and so this is the left part. What are in the right brain? The third character is the right brain thinking, very playful, very getting excited easily, easygoing, no judgment at all. No judgment refers to the right brain characters, both of them. And the fourth character, this is our true self or transcendental self. It has the universal heart and connectedness, true compassion, the joy of being alive, and the ability to embrace complexity and look for consensual agreements. So so finding good for all. If we want to really stop this me, mine, I world and create something that is based on we, us, ours, then we need to cultivate these two hemispheres characters. And one thing is very important, the 90-second rule. Dr. Giobbotti said that we have only 90 seconds by which we have the ability and the power to choose in between the four characters. Because thoughts, emotions, and physiological reaction, they are aligned. For example, I remember someone who 20 years ago did me something, and I still have anger or resentment, and it is still very strong within me. So first the thought, the memory comes, and then just in a few seconds, I am totally absorbed in the anger or the resentment. And then if I'm not stopping myself, and if I don't have the capacity by mindfulness, meditation, whatever, that, hey, stop, no, if I'm staying in the anger, and then again, my lifesaver shadow is running the show, and I really want to stay present, and I really want to be playful, and I really want to forgive, because sometimes I can become an asshole too. Then within these 90 seconds, all the adrenaline just rushes through my body, and anger is just everywhere. Okay? So this is the 90 seconds rule, and in order to have this freedom, we need to meditate. Angelo, can we have the last slide? Okay, and yes, definitely, we are at the threshold of a new world, the new era, and it's a must. There is no time to waste. We really need to help our children, and we really need to leave a positive legacy for all the generations that are coming after. And let me quote here Buckminster Fuller, whom I love also very much, and he says that if we want to create something new, then we need to stop fighting against the existing reality, the existing model. We need to build up something new that will make the old model obsolete. And the three pillars of the true and committed spiritual path are practice, 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 practice. This is the most important. Integration of the old wounds, and surround ourselves with like-minded people. We do not need to do it alone, and we are designed to heal together. And thank you for the attention. And oh, I was a little bit more. I know, I'm sorry, but this is my passion. So anyway, thank you for listening and being with me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amici. And a couple of things. If you go to the handout part, all the handouts you can download now if you like. It's on the upper right-hand screen. You'll be able to see them. They're open, and you can download them. And now we're going to open it up for questions. We basically have about 15 minutes. I'm going to go through the ones that are in the chat. If you want to bring some other ones, please put your questions in the chat, and I'll just address them to the panelists, and we'll see how we go. There's only 2 questions there. So the first one, Jim, do you think that we, as the human species, can find guidance to navigate new future scenarios, reality, if we deeply access alignment with universal wisdom source, the field, to inform us and raise our conscious being?
So it's really a question for all of us. And Sean, I think, has left the discussion. He had to leave a few minutes ago. But it would be worth the 3 of us addressing this briefly. I wanted to just give an experience from my own life in a variety of circumstances earlier in my life in the Soviet Union and related areas. I was involved with, in a sense, creating and manifesting projects that experts in the field said could never be done. And a part of what I was involved with was similar to what Matt has been describing, a contemplative practice each morning as I arose from my hotel bed, in which first I just spent 20 minutes, sorry, Matt, maybe 15. I didn't do an extra hour when I didn't do 20. Just, being, and then suggesting guidance for the day to provide me with a path toward realizing the next steps in a project that everybody I knew who were experts in the field said could never be done. And what came, and that was important, because that then opened up, I then had experiences throughout the day that from my point of view were not created by me, but were a part of the larger consciousness that was attempting to make some of this real. And I came out of it with the following little advice for myself, that in the kind of circumstance Sean is asking about, for example, I say, you need to practice the right ratio between surrender and action. The first step is surrendering into what Sean calls alignment with the universal wisdom source, the field, out of which comes some kind of impulse. It's not necessarily, stated in a PDF file, but some kind of guidance that then is, for me at least, what decides action. So it's the right ratio between surrender and action. And yes, I think that this applies to all experiences that are challenging, especially the world we're moving into. And at the same time, we have to remember to be flexible. That's a part of what comes with contemplative work and the kind of approach that Emeshe has said, that we need flexibility built into our capacity to respond. So we are able to adapt to, life's moments as they occur. Matt,
Any other answers, Jim, Matt? Excuse me, Emeshe, Matt?
Matt, what would you say about
Yeah, I love, this balance between surrender and action. And I understand it to me as actively surrendering. I mean, the short answer to Sean's, question is yes, I do believe that we can do that. And what's helped me kind of move more into that direction is, and a lot of this isn't proved, but I think that we're revealing, things about the nature of reality very quickly nowadays, that to think of the brain as less as the organism that is producing consciousness, and to think of brain more as like a radio that can tune into the frequency of consciousness. And quantum physics
Right.
already says from the very beginning of the Big Bang, all particles are connected. And through the insights of neuroscience and the practice of mindfulness, when we can learn to train our brains to relax down into and absorb the intelligence that is at the foundation of the universe, of life itself, I think that, you know, we don't necessarily accessing it is one word, but we actually become it. We are transformed by it, and therefore express it in alignment. And if we can begin to stop thinking of ourselves as separate individuals, but just like neurons come together to create the brain, to think of ourselves as neurons in the superorganism of humanity that is trying to express an alignment with the fundamental nature of life and the universe. So I absolutely believe in that. And I look forward to, you know, the progress that we make and being able to validate that stuff with our scientific methodologies that are constantly improving. So it's a journey, but that's my take on it.
And Meishe, anything to add?
Yeah. I really want to be short. And let me bring here a quote from the Tao Te Ching. And it's like when a master runs into a difficulty, she slows down and gives herself fully to it, which means that, yeah, this is what we are doing here. We even, you know, we can practice for decades or even longer, but difficulties will come. And yes, we are facing lots of challenges now, but we are designed for these challenges, for this time. We need to slow down and give ourselves fully into it. So what is my role? How am I feeling here? Who are the people around me? What will be my next action? What is my relationship to this challenge? And these questions just weren't even asked a few years ago. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, when a difficulty arose, it was just, okay, how to fix it, how to fix it, how to fix it. And this is where we are. But we know much more now. So we need to cultivate everything.
So we have another question from my dear friend, Lori Lippin. I'm so happy to see you, Lori. And I think this is mostly for Matt, but it can be for everyone. Please say more to explain how attention is a currency of leadership. Matt, you're muted.
But I suggest looking up Amiri Jah's work, who's the neuroscience out of Miami University. I mean, basically, a leader, the consciousness of a leader reverberates throughout an organization. And so how that leader holds themselves is absolutely essential to the ethos and well-being of the entire organization. So everything that we've talked about mindfulness, you know, one of the terms that I used growing up was when I would get emotionally hijacked. Anger would come up and it would be like absolute truth. And it felt so real. And I had no other choice but to react from that place. And that can be a dangerous game because emotions, sensations, thoughts do change over time. And the ability to be grounded enough in presence to allow experiences to come and then go, but not make impulsive decisions because of them, I think is one of the greatest traits not only anyone can have, but especially leaders who are responsible for the well-being of others. And they demonstrate that not only as an example among themselves, but it also gives them really a capacity to meet other people where they're at, to understand the emotional intelligence of how someone is feeling that day, to see their gift that might not have shown up on their resume or their challenge that was overlooked, and to make leadership decisions accordingly. I mean, I think it does come down to hyper complexity in a world that is constantly changing and requiring accurate, strategic decisions more often than not. You know, how do you begin to filter out what's real and what's not when you've got junk always arising? And so when she says it's a currency, I think what she means is it's a common denominator. It's one of the most fundamental skill sets that one can have when in a leadership position. And we think about it, you know, I read the Celestine Prophecy. We think about it as relationship and energetic dynamics. It's like to have someone's attention is one of the most precious gifts that one can give. You know, it's the gift of being human is our presence. So I won't go on much longer, but those are the things that first come to mind when I think of Amiri Jah's statement. Thanks for the question.
Any other comments, Jim and Mishi?
Maybe just one. Yeah, energy follows attention. I think this is also a very common statement that we hear here and there. And since I'm dealing with leaders, and I really love the work of Brené Brown, and one of her latest books is Dare to Lead, which is about vulnerability. And really, leaders need to be friended by their shadow, by the second character. And this is the attention, and this is also about the emotional hijack that Matt was talking about. So we need to have a good self-awareness, self-knowledge, and really an inner map. That what are my trigger points that we just, you know, pull me into that second character, and then I lose the connection of myself, and then I lose the connection with the others, and how to be really there and how to be available for my team when I feel triggered. Can I just simply, you know, say it out, or is it a kind of shameful thing? So yeah, definitely. So this kind of attention is the currency of leadership. I would just add that, yes, the attention for inside and outside. So I need to have an attention for myself inside as well, in order to have a good attention and good connection with all the people around.
It's beautiful. Jim, a last word, and I'm going to tell them about the September 9th class. Did you have a response to the question, Jim?
No, that I think the two of them have said it very well. Thank you, though.
Yeah, so I'm going to be the sort of traffic cop here. If any of you want to basically ask any other questions of the presenters, just send it to me at angelo@sacredinclusion.com, and I will relay to them, and you will get an answer. I can guarantee it. And I did want to tell you about our the Applied Neuroscience course that these presenters are doing. It starts on September 9th, goes for subsequent weeks. And if you click on this link here, if you use the link, which is in the offer thing here somewhere, you'll be able to, you'll be able to get 10% discount. And also, starting today, actually, our Sacred Inclusion Network community site is now open. And you can join by simply clicking on https bit.ly Sacred Inclusion. And this month's theme is neuroscience and spirituality. And I'm hoping, and I think Jim already said that he was going to drop in from now and all month. We're going to be talking about this subject. So I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And I will make a recording available for all of you. I don't exactly know how that works, but I will figure it out. And thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ameshe. And thank you, all participants.